I spent most of my life believing my parents were right about me. They told me I was the daughter who would never make it, the one who always needed help, the one who was not as capable as everyone else. I carried those words for years until one message from my grandmother changed the way I saw myself forever. My name is Olivia Carter, and for as long as I can remember, I felt like I was standing outside my own family looking in. I was the youngest child in our family, but I never felt like the one who was protected or celebrated. My parents, Richard and Susan Carter, always seemed more confident in my older brother's choices and achievements. When he received a promotion, the whole family celebrated. When he bought his first house, my parents told everyone how proud they were. Back when I worked hard toward my own goals, their response was usually quiet. They would smile politely and say things like, "That is nice, Olivia," before changing the conversation. Over time, I started believing that maybe I really was not special. Maybe I was the person they saw me as. I worked hard, but I never felt like my efforts counted. I tried different careers, moved to different places, and searched for something that made me feel successful. Every time I made progress, I still heard the same doubts in my mind. The hardest part was not that my parents questioned my choices. The hardest part was that I began questioning them too. The only person who never made me feel that way was my grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore. She was the one person in my family who always looked at me differently. Whenever I visited her small home in Pennsylvania, she never asked about my mistakes first. She asked about my dreams. She would sit with me at her kitchen table, pour me a cup of tea, and remind me that a person's value was not measured by someone else's opinion. Olivia, she would always say, people often notice what is missing before they notice what is growing. I never forgot those words. As I got older, I visited her less often because life became busy. Work, responsibilities, and family expectations filled my days. But whenever I called her, she still made me feel like the same little girl who had endless possibilities. Then one winter afternoon, I received a message from her that seemed strange. It was only 4 words. The bluebird sings. At first, I smiled because it sounded like something from an old childhood game. But then I stopped. I remembered. Years earlier, when I was a teenager, my grandmother had created a special code with me. She said every person should have a way to ask for help when they felt they could not explain what was wrong. It was something private between us. A phrase only we understood. She told me that if she ever used those words, I needed to pay attention. I stared at my phone, reading the message again and again. My first thought was that maybe she had sent it by accident. Maybe she was simply remembering the old game we played together. But something inside me felt different. My grandmother was not someone who sent random messages. She chose her words carefully. I immediately called her, but she did not answer. I tried again a few minutes later. Still nothing. A feeling of concern began to grow inside me, but I also knew I needed to stay calm. I decided to drive to her house the next morning. Before I left, I looked around my apartment and thought about how strange life could be. The people who were supposed to believe in me most had spent years making me doubt myself. Yet the one person who saw my potential was the woman everyone else considered too old to understand what was happening. I did not know what I would find when I arrived at my grandmother's house. I did not know why she had used a secret code we had not spoken about in years. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something I had almost forgotten. I felt that maybe I mattered. And I was about to discover why my grandmother needed me to know the truth. The drive to my grandmother's house felt longer than it really was. Every mile gave me more time to think about the message she had sent and the memories attached to those 4 words. The bluebird sings. I had not heard that phrase since I was a teenager, but I remembered exactly what it meant. My grandmother had created that code during a difficult time in my life when I felt like nobody understood me. She told me that sometimes people struggle to ask for help directly. Some things they need a bridge between fear and honesty. She wanted me to know that I would always have a way to reach her, and she wanted a way to reach me too. As I pulled into her driveway, I immediately noticed something unusual. Her car was there, but the front curtains were still closed even though it was already late morning. Normally, my grandmother was awake early. She loved opening the windows, watering her flowers, and preparing breakfast while listening to old music. He walked to the front door and knocked. "Grandma, it is Olivia," I called. After a few seconds, the door opened. There she was. Eleanor Whitmore. 82 years old, with her silver hair neatly styled and the same warm smile I had known my entire life. But I could tell something was different. She looked tired. Not just physically tired, but emotionally exhausted. "You came," she said softly. He hugged her tightly. "Of course I came. Your message scared me." She looked at me for a moment and then invited me inside. The house looked exactly the way I remembered it. The old wooden bookshelf filled with family photos. The comfortable chair where she always sat while reading. The small kitchen table where she had given me advice throughout my childhood. Being there reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. This was the one place where I had never felt like I needed to prove myself. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, and she reached for my hand. "Olivia, I knew you would understand the message." He nodded. "Why did you send it?" She took a deep breath. "Because I needed you to know something before anyone else could tell you a different version of the story." Those words immediately caught my attention. "What story?" he asked. My grandmother looked toward the window for a moment before answering. "Your parents have always loved you, Olivia. But love does not always mean people see clearly. Sometimes people become so certain about who they think you are that they stop noticing who you are becoming." He listened carefully. She continued. "For years, I watched you work harder than anyone. He watched you struggle, learn, and keep moving forward. But your parents only seemed to notice the moments when things did not go perfectly." Hearing her say those words was emotional because they described exactly how I had felt for years. "Grandma, why are you telling me this now?" he asked. She opened a drawer beside the table and pulled out a small envelope. My name was written on the front in her handwriting. "I was waiting for the right moment," she said. "And I think that moment has arrived." He looked at the envelope but did not open it yet. Something about it felt important. "What is inside?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "Answers." My heart started beating faster. He had spent so much of my life believing I was the problem. He believed I was the daughter who needed to work harder, become better, and somehow earn the approval of my own family. But sitting there with my grandmother, I started wondering if I had been carrying a burden that was never mine to carry. Before I could open the envelope, my grandmother placed her hand over mine. "Olivia, I need you to promise me something." "What?" he asked. "Promise me that when you learn the truth, you will not look at yourself the way they taught you to look at yourself. You are not a disappointment. You never were." Those words stayed with me. Because for the first time, I realized the message she sent was not only a request for help. It was a reminder. A reminder from the one person who had always seen me clearly. And as I finally opened the envelope, I knew my understanding of my family was about to change forever. The envelope felt heavier than it should have as I held it in my hands. It was only a small piece of paper wrapped inside, but somehow I knew it carried years of things left unsaid. My grandmother watched me carefully, not with fear, but with the patience of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He slowly opened the envelope and pulled out a handwritten letter. The first line immediately caught my attention. "Dear Olivia, If you are reading this, then you finally know that you were never the person they told you that you were. I stopped for a moment. Those words alone made my eyes fill with emotion. My grandmother had always known how much I struggled with my confidence. She knew the comments from my parents had stayed with me longer than I admitted. She knew every time I compared myself to my brother and wondered why I never seemed to make them proud. He continued reading. The letter was not about blaming my parents. It was about reminding me of things I had forgotten. My grandmother wrote about the first time I helped her recover after she had a difficult year. She wrote about the way I organized her home, managed appointments, and stayed by her side when others were too busy. She wrote about the times I solved problems quietly without asking for recognition. According to her, those moments showed my character more than any job title or achievement ever could. He looked up from the letter. Grandma, why did nobody else see these things? She gave me a gentle smile. Some people only recognize success when it looks like what they expected. Her answer stayed with me. Because I realized my parents had always measured me by a specific image of success. They wanted a certain career, a certain lifestyle, and certain accomplishments they could talk about with others. When my path looked different, they assumed I was falling behind. But my grandmother saw something different. She saw resilience. She saw kindness. She saw someone who kept trying even when nobody was cheering. Then she reached into the drawer again and pulled out another item. This time it was a small notebook. Your grandmother kept records? He asked with a slight smile. She laughed softly. Only because I knew one day you might need to remember yourself. The notebook contained small moments from my life that I had completely forgotten. A note about the day I helped a neighbor after a storm. A memory from when I created a fundraiser at school. A reminder of when I helped my younger cousin with homework every weekend. They were not major accomplishments that would appear on a resume. But they were proof of the person I had always been. Olivia, my grandmother said, your parents are not bad people. But sometimes people become trapped by the version of you they created in their minds. They stop seeing the person standing in front of them. He thought about all the times I walked away from family gatherings feeling smaller than when I arrived. He thought about every moment I accepted their opinions as facts. Maybe the biggest mistake I had made was not believing in myself. It was believing that their judgment was the final answer. My grandmother reached across the table and held my hand. There is something else you need to know, she said. Her voice became more serious. I did not send that message only because I needed you to come here. He sent it because I believe something is happening in this family that you need to understand. He looked at her carefully. What do you mean? She looked toward the hallway where old family photographs hung on the wall. Your parents have been making decisions without telling you. Decisions that involve the future of this family. My heart sank slightly. He thought about the years of feeling excluded. The feeling that important conversations happened around me but never included me. Why would they do that? He asked. My grandmother took a deep breath. Because they still see you as the daughter who needs guidance instead of the woman who can stand on her own. Those words were painful, but they also gave me clarity. For years, I had been trying to prove I was capable. But maybe I no longer needed to prove anything. Maybe I needed to understand why my family had never truly seen me. My grandmother looked at me and said quietly, the truth is coming, Olivia. But this time, you need to face it knowing who you are. And for the first time in my life, I believed her. I left my grandmother's house that evening with more questions than answers, but for the first time in years, I did not feel lost. I felt aware. There was a difference. Before, I spent so much time wondering why my family did not believe in me. I wondered what I had done wrong. I wondered why my efforts never seemed to be enough. But after talking with Eleanor, I started asking a different question. What if the problem was never that I was not enough? What if I had simply been surrounded by people who never took the time to truly see me? On the drive back home, I kept thinking about my grandmother's words. They still see you as the daughter who needs guidance instead of the woman who can stand on her own. That sentence stayed with me because it explained something I had felt for years but could never describe. My parents did not just underestimate my abilities. They had created a version of me in their minds, and every time I tried to show them who I really was, they compared me to the person they expected me to become. When I arrived home, I sat at my kitchen table and looked through old family photos. There was a picture of me and my parents when I was young. He was standing between them, smiling, holding a small school award. It was not a major achievement. It was just something I had worked hard for and wanted to share. He remembered that day clearly. He remembered hoping my parents would be proud. They had congratulated me, but the conversation quickly moved to my brother's accomplishments. At the time, I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I was being too sensitive. But now I understood that small moments repeated over many years can shape how a person sees themselves. The next morning, I called my grandmother. "Are you sure there is something happening that I need to know?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Olivia, I do not want you to misunderstand me. I am not trying to create distance between you and your parents." "I know," I said. "But I need to understand." She explained that over the past few months, she had noticed conversations between my parents that concerned her. They had been discussing changes involving family responsibilities and decisions about her future care. The part that hurt me was not that they were making plans. Families make plans all the time. The painful part was that they had not included me at all. My grandmother explained that she had overheard my parents saying that I would only make things complicated if I knew too much. They believed I was too emotional and too inexperienced to handle serious family matters. He sat silently after hearing that. Those words were familiar because they matched the image my parents had carried of me for years. He was always the one who needed help. The one who needed advice. The one whose opinion came after everyone else's. But this time, something inside me changed. He was no longer hearing those words as a reflection of who I was. He was hearing them as a reflection of how they chose to see me. That difference gave me strength. Later that day, I decided to visit my parents. He did not go there to argue. He did not go there to prove them wrong. He went because I finally understood that avoiding difficult conversations would only continue the same pattern. When I arrived, my mother welcomed me with surprise. "Olivia, we did not expect you today." He smiled calmly. "I know. He wanted to talk with both of you." My father looked up from the newspaper. "Is everything okay?" For years, that question would have made me uncomfortable. He would have immediately said yes. He would have protected everyone from an honest conversation. But that was different now. "I think we need to talk about something important," I said. They looked at each other. He could see uncertainty in their expressions. They were not used to seeing me this way. They were used to the daughter who stayed quiet. The daughter who accepted their opinions without question. But that daughter was no longer sitting in front of them. He took a breath and continued. "I know you have been making decisions about Grandma's future. I know you have had conversations without including me." The room became quiet. My mother looked surprised. My father lowered the newspaper slowly. "Who told you that?" he asked. He looked at them calmly. "Someone who has always believed I was capable of understanding the truth." In that moment, I realized something important. He was not there to convince my parents that I had value. He was there because I already knew I did. And whatever happened next, I would no longer allow anyone else to define who I was. The silence that followed my words felt different from the silence I had known my entire life. In the past, silence at my parents' house usually meant I had said too much. It meant I had asked a question they did not want to answer or shared an opinion they did not expect from me. But this time, I was not sitting there as the daughter who needed approval. I was sitting there as an adult woman who deserved to be part of important family conversations. My mother looked down at the table, and my father leaned back in his chair. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, my father said, "Olivia, this is not what you think." He looked at him calmly. "Then help me understand what it is." That was the first time I noticed something I had never seen before. They did not immediately tell me I was wrong. They did not tell me I was overreacting. They seemed unsure. My mother folded her hands and sighed. "We did not include you because we thought we were protecting everyone." He listened carefully. "Protecting everyone from what?" he asked. "From unnecessary stress." Those words sounded familiar. They were the same explanation I had heard in different forms throughout my life. People making choices for me because they believed they knew what was best. He looked at both of them and said, "I understand wanting to protect someone. But protecting me does not mean making decisions without me." My father looked away. He could tell the conversation was becoming uncomfortable, but I also knew that discomfort was necessary. Some truths are difficult because they force people to look at patterns they have ignored for years. My mother explained that they had been discussing how to support my grandmother as she got older. They were concerned about her health and wanted to make sure everything was organized. He understood that. He respected their concern. But then I asked the question that had been sitting in my mind since my grandmother's message. Why did you believe I could not be part of that conversation? Neither of them answered immediately. Finally, my father said, "Because you have always had so much going on. We did not want to add more responsibility." He nodded slowly. "That sounds reasonable, but that is not the whole truth." My mother looked surprised. "What do you mean?" He took a breath. "I mean you have spent years assuming I cannot handle difficult things. You have made decisions based on who you think I am instead of asking me who I have become." The room became quiet again. But this time, I was not afraid of the silence. I had spent too many years trying to fill uncomfortable moments with explanations and apologies. He had apologized for my choices, my personality, and even my dreams. He was tired of doing that. My father looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Olivia, we never wanted you to feel that way." He believed that he meant it. He did not think my parents woke up every morning trying to hurt me. But I also knew good intentions did not erase the impact of years of being underestimated. "I know you love me," I said. "But love is not just about caring. It is also about respecting someone enough to believe they can stand beside you." My mother's eyes became emotional. "Your grandmother talked to you about this, didn't she?" He nodded. "She reminded me of something I forgot. She reminded me that I am capable." Hearing myself say those words felt powerful. Not because I was trying to prove anything to them, but because I finally believed them myself. The conversation lasted for hours. We talked about memories from my childhood, moments I had carried quietly, and misunderstandings that had grown over time. My parents admitted they had compared me to my brother more than they realized. They admitted they often focused on what they thought I needed to improve instead of recognizing what I had already accomplished. It was not an instant solution. Years of feeling unseen could not disappear in one afternoon. But something important happened. For the first time, my parents were listening. And for the first time, I was speaking without fear. When I left their house that evening, I did not feel like I had won an argument. I felt something much more meaningful. I felt like I had finally introduced them to the real Olivia Carter. The person my grandmother had always known was there. After that conversation with my parents, I expected to feel relieved. I thought finally saying what I had carried inside for years would make everything feel completely different. But the truth was more complicated. When you spend a lifetime believing you are not enough, one honest conversation does not instantly remove every doubt. It takes time to rebuild the way you see yourself. For the first few days after our talk, I found myself thinking about every word that was said. I replayed my parents' reactions. I remembered their expressions when I told them how I felt. They were not perfect. They did not suddenly become different people overnight. But they listened. And that was something I had been waiting for longer than I realized. A week later, my grandmother invited me back to her house. When I arrived, she was sitting in her favorite chair near the window, looking through an old family album. She smiled when she saw me. "You look different," she said. I laughed softly. "Different how?" She closed the album and looked at me. Like someone who finally stopped asking permission to be herself. Her words made me smile because they described exactly what I was beginning to understand. For years, I thought confidence came from proving people wrong. I thought one day I would achieve something so impressive that my parents would finally say they were proud of me. But my grandmother helped me see that confidence does not come from winning someone else's approval. It comes from accepting yourself before anyone else does. As we sat together, I told her about my conversation with my parents. She listened carefully and nodded. "I am proud of you, Olivia." I smiled. "Because I spoke up." She shook her head. "No. Because you spoke up without becoming someone you are not." That meant more to me than she knew. I had always believed that standing up for myself meant becoming harder or colder. But my grandmother showed me that strength could still be gentle. It could come from honesty, paciencia, and self-respect. Later that afternoon, she told me more about why she had been concerned. She explained that she had noticed a pattern in my family for years. My parents often made decisions based on their assumptions about me. They did not see my mistakes as normal parts of growth. They saw them as proof that I needed guidance. "Your parents love you," my grandmother said. "But sometimes love can become mixed with fear. They were afraid you would struggle, so they focused on preventing problems instead of recognizing your abilities." I thought about that for a long time. It helped me understand something important. My parents' behavior had hurt me, but it was not because I had no value. It was because they had created a limited picture of who they believed I was. That realization changed everything. A few days later, I received a phone call from my mother. Normally, I would have felt nervous seeing her name appear on my screen. I would have wondered if I had done something wrong. But this time, I answered calmly. "Hi, Mom." There was a pause before she spoke. "Olivia, I wanted to thank you for talking with us." I was surprised. "Thank me." She continued, "I have been thinking about what you said. I realized that I have spent a lot of time worrying about what you might not be able to do instead of appreciating what you have done." I sat quietly, letting her words sink in. It was not a perfect apology. It did not erase everything that happened. But it was a beginning. "Mom, I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "I do not need you to see me as perfect. I just need you to see me as capable." She took a deep breath. "I am trying." Those two words meant more than a dramatic promise would have. Because change is not proven through one emotional conversation. Change is proven through small choices made over time. When I ended the call, I looked out my window and thought about the journey I had been on. My grandmother's secret message did not just reveal a family problem. It revealed something inside me that had been waiting to be discovered. I was not the useless daughter my parents once believed I was. I was a woman who had survived years of doubt and still found the courage to speak. And for the first time, I was not trying to become someone worthy of love. I finally understood that I always had been. I thought the hardest part of my journey would be discovering the truth. I believed that once I understood why my family had treated me differently for so many years, everything would become easier. But I learned something important. Discovering the truth is only the beginning. The real challenge is deciding what you do with that truth. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to earn a place in my own family. I stopped waiting for someone to finally tell me that I was enough. Instead, I started building a relationship with myself based on respect and confidence. A few weeks after my conversation with my mother, my family gathered at my grandmother's house for a Sunday dinner. It was something we had done many times before, but this time everything felt different. In the past, I would walk into family gatherings wondering how I was being judged. I would carefully choose my words. I would avoid sharing too much because I did not want anyone to think I was making excuses for my choices. But that day, I walked through the door feeling calm. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was no longer afraid of being misunderstood. My brother, Daniel, was already there with his family. Growing up, Daniel had always been the person my parents compared me to. He was successful, confident, and followed the path they expected. For years, I believed that meant he was better than me. But as I got older, I realized we were simply different people with different strengths. During dinner, my father brought up a problem involving some family paperwork. Normally, conversations like that would happen without me. Someone would make a decision, and I would hear about it later. But this time, my father looked at me and said, "Olivia, what do you think?" The question was simple, but it felt significant. He paused for a moment because I realized how rare it was to be asked. Not because I did not have opinions. Not because I was incapable of understanding. Simply because people had become comfortable assuming I did not need to be included. He shared my thoughts calmly, and everyone listened. There was no interruption. No one dismissed my ideas. It was a small moment, but it represented something much bigger. My grandmother watched from across the table with a quiet smile. She knew exactly what that moment meant. Later that evening, while everyone was outside, she walked beside me in her garden. "Do you notice what changed?" she asked. Ismail. "They are listening." She nodded. "Yes. But there is something else. You are listening too." He looked at her, confused. "To myself," she explained. "For years, you heard everyone else's opinion louder than your own." Her words stayed with me. Because she was right. The biggest battle was never just convincing my parents to see me differently. It was learning to stop seeing myself through their expectations. That was the part nobody else could do for me. Over the next several months, I noticed small changes in my family. My parents started asking for my opinion more often. They called me not only when they needed something, but also when they wanted to share their lives with me. Our relationship was not suddenly perfect. There were still moments when old habits appeared. There were still conversations where I had to remind them that I was capable. But now I knew how to respond. He no longer became quiet. He no longer accepted every assumption about me as truth. He spoke with patience and confidence. One afternoon, I visited my grandmother and thanked her for sending that message. She smiled and said, "Olivia, I did not give you confidence. He only reminded you that you already had it." That sentence meant everything to me. Because she was right. My grandmother did not create the strength inside me. She simply helped me find it again. The secret code she sent was never just a warning. It was a reminder that someone believed in me when I had forgotten how to believe in myself. And as I looked back at everything that had happened, I realized the daughter my parents once underestimated had never disappeared. She had been there all along, waiting for the moment she finally recognized her own worth. I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting. I thought if someone hurt you, the only way to move forward was to pretend the past never happened. But my journey with my family taught me something different. Forgiveness is not about erasing memories. It is about understanding what happened, accepting what cannot be changed, and choosing not to let old pain control your future. After everything that happened, my relationship with my parents slowly began to change. It was not because they suddenly became perfect. It was because all of us started making different choices. My parents began to ask questions instead of making assumptions. I began to speak honestly instead of staying quiet. We were learning how to have a relationship based on who we actually were, not who we thought each other should be. One afternoon, my mother invited me to lunch. It was something she had never done often before. Usually, our conversations happened during family gatherings or when there was something practical to discuss. But this time, it was just the two of us. When I arrived, she smiled and hugged me. It was a small gesture, but I noticed it immediately. We sat at a quiet cafe near her home, and for a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things. The weather. Family updates. Everyday life. Then she became quiet. Olivia, she said, I have been thinking about what you told us. He looked at her and listened. I realize now that I spent a lot of years worrying about protecting you from disappointment. But I did not realize that I was also preventing you from showing me what you were capable of. Hearing those words from my mother was something I never expected. He had spent so many years hoping she would finally understand me. But I realized I was not looking for a perfect apology. He was looking for recognition. He wanted her to see the person I had always been. Mom, I said, I know you wanted the best for me. But sometimes the way people try to help can make someone feel like they are not trusted. She nodded. I understand that now. Our conversation was not dramatic. There were no big speeches or emotional moments that changed everything instantly. It was simply two people finally being honest with each other. And sometimes, that is where the biggest changes begin. Later that month, my father also reached out to me. He asked if I wanted to help him with a project around the house. It was something simple, but I noticed something different. It was not asking because he thought I needed to learn something. It was asking because he valued my opinion. As we worked together, he said something that surprised me. You know, Olivia, your grandmother always believed in you. Ismail. She always did. Nodded. I think she saw things in you that we missed. Those words were difficult to hear because part of me wondered why it took so long. But another part of me understood that people sometimes need time to recognize their own mistakes. What mattered was that the relationship was changing. Not because I forced them to change, but because honesty created space for something better. Through all of this, my grandmother remained my greatest source of wisdom. One evening, we sat together watching the sunset from her porch. She looked peaceful. He thanked her again for sending the message that brought me back to her. She smiled and said, Olivia, I knew you would come. You have always had a caring heart. He just wanted you to remember that caring about others does not mean forgetting yourself. He thought about how different my life felt compared to a year earlier. Back then, I believed my family's opinion defined me. He believed being misunderstood meant something was wrong with me. Now I knew better. The way people see you does not always reflect who you are. Sometimes people only see the version of you they created in their minds. But that does not mean you have to live inside that version forever. He was still the same Olivia Carter. He still cared deeply. He still valued my family. But I no longer needed their approval to know my worth. The greatest change was not that my parents finally saw me differently. The greatest change was that I finally saw myself clearly. When I think about the message my grandmother sent me, I no longer see it as a moment that exposed a family problem. I see it as the moment that helped me discover who I truly was. At the time, I believed I was searching for answers about my parents. I thought I needed to understand why they had spent so many years underestimating me. But the deeper I went into that journey, the more I realized something important. The greatest discovery was not about them. It was about me. For most of my life, I had allowed other people's opinions to become my own. When my parents doubted me, I questioned myself. When they compared me to others, I wondered if I was falling behind. When they made decisions without including me, I assumed it was because I was not capable enough. But my grandmother helped me see the truth. Their beliefs about me were not facts. They were simply the way they viewed me. And I had the power to decide whether I accepted that view or created my own. Over the following months, my relationship with my family continued to grow in ways I never expected. My parents were not suddenly different people, but they became more aware. They started asking about my plans, my ideas, and my feelings. They started noticing things they had ignored before. One evening, my father called me just to ask how my week was going. It was a small thing, but I remember sitting there after the call ended and smiling. Years earlier, I would have considered that a normal conversation. But after everything we had experienced, I understood the meaning behind it. It was a sign that something had changed. My father was no longer seeing me as the daughter who needed constant direction. It was beginning to see me as the woman I had become. My grandmother also continued to remind me of something I never wanted to forget. She told me that families are not built by people who never make mistakes. They are built by people who are willing to learn from them. I carried those words with me because they changed the way I looked at my parents. I no longer saw them only through the pain they caused. I began to see them as people who had their own fears and limitations. That did not excuse the years when I felt unseen, but it helped me release the anger I had carried for so long. One afternoon, I visited my grandmother and brought her a framed photograph of the two of us together. She looked at it and smiled. You know, Olivia, I did not send you that message because I thought you needed to save me. I looked at her. Then why did you send it? She smiled warmly. Because I knew you needed to save yourself from believing something that was never true. Those words stayed with me. Because that was exactly what had happened. I had spent years trying to prove I was valuable, when the truth was that my value had never depended on Anjone's approval. My grandmother saw that before anyone else did. She saw the kindness, determination, and strength that existed inside me even when I could not see it myself. Looking back, I am grateful for the secret code we shared. It was not just a phrase from my childhood. It was a reminder that someone believed in me during the years when I struggled to believe in myself. It reminded me that sometimes the person who changes your life is not the person who gives you answers. It is the person who helps you find the courage to discover them yourself. Today, I still love my family. I still appreciate the memories we shared and the lessons we have learned together. But I also understand something I wish I had known years ago. Being misunderstood does not mean you are unworthy. Being overlooked does not mean you have no value. And being underestimated does not mean you are powerless. I am Olivia Carter. I am a daughter, a granddaughter, and a woman who finally understands her own strength. My grandmother's message did not just change my family's view of me. It changed the way I viewed myself. And that was the truth I had been searching for all along.